So welcome everyone to this meeting of the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Panel. My name is Hannah McKirker, I'm chair of this panel. Could I invite other members to please introduce themselves?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Matthew McLaughlin from the Colne Valley Ward.
Councillor John Taylor, Kirkburton Ward.
Councillor Tim Manford, Demmydale Ward.
Gareth Kitchen, Volunteer Co-op Tea.
Thank you very much. And just a quick reminder to everyone that we are being live webcast. Moving to, we've got apologies from Councillor Simpson. So we can then move on to the minutes of the previous meeting and ask if anyone's prepared to... Yeah, thank you. Is anyone prepared to second that? Thank you very much. Is everyone else happy with that? Thank you. Disclose a declaration of interests. If any members do have interest to declare, just please make sure that you complete the relevant paperwork and to officers. Thank you. As far as I'm aware, all items can be taken in public. Lovely. And do we have any deputations and petitions?
None received.
Thank you. And no public questions?
None received.
Thank you. So we have one main item on the agenda today, and that is the waste disposal contract procurement, which I still can't say. I'm going to invite Graham West to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Graham West. I'm the Service Director for Street Scene, Highways and Waste. So today we are going to chat around our waste procurement. And as we know that the waste PFI contract was signed in 1998, which seemed a long time ago, well indeed it is, 27 years ago, was originally extended for 2 years in March 2023 under some interim arrangements. And the interim arrangements that we've currently got now within the borough for our PFI contract have been subject to quite a bit of scrutiny, both externally and as well as internally, and are providing a good service for us at this particular time. However, we can't stop there. We now need to move on because there is a limited period of time that we can extend our contractual arrangements, and that will be made clear as we go through this presentation. The current arrangements are delivering what we expect from an outcome point of view, and we are continuing to see more recycling across the borough, but we do realise that we need to do more from a recycling point of view. And that is something that the team are working on at the moment. A lot of that is around culture and behaviour, and we're doing a lot of work in order to improve that. Despite that, we do maintain a landfill diversion of at least 85% within this contractual arrangement, which is really, really positive. And also, the current arrangement has made sure that we have maintained the assets within the borough. So the energy from waste plant, the MRF and more have all been maintained over that period of time, which is really, really positive. But of course, procurement is complex in its nature anyway. And there are many interdependencies between the waste contract and other elements across the service. And despite government in last year launching their simpler recycling ambition, there's still detail to be identified from that particular launch, which is making it very, very difficult for people like ourselves that are looking at a future procurement because of the uncertainties that we face around not quite knowing what the government would like us to do regarding recycling and how that might change some of the statutory requirements that we currently operate under. So again, this report today, which will go to the Cabinet on the 9th of April, is making a recommendation to further extend the interim arrangements that we're seeing. We can extend for a further 3 years, which would take us up to March 2028. And this would allow us to have more time for government, for legislation, and for us to think a little bit more about what we need to see in our new procurement arrangements. But it has to stop there. We can't extend past March 2028. So the window of opportunity now for us to move this forward is here and now, and not to delay any further. We do appreciate that the extension will allow us to maintain what we believe is still a cost-effective procurement cost-effective contract, and again that has been tested. We know the market fluctuates quite a bit, and going to the market at the most appropriate time would be sensible, because the next contractual arrangements, we'd like it to be in place for quite a while, and if we went when the market was not stable, then we might not get the best value for money at this particular time, but I'm sure colleagues will come on to that shortly. We also want to make sure that we've got that time, as I mentioned earlier, to reflect on further improvements to our waste procurement. So remember, this is the disposal side of the organisation. We clearly want to look in more details at the MRF, where we look at our recycling. Can that be improved? Is there a different method? Is there a different solution there? We clearly also want to look at our household waste and recycling centres, and again to see how they can be improved and how we can maximise some efficiencies. There's some great work happening at the moment across some of these areas for recycling. The reuse shop is just one example of that, and we'd like to see that we can extend, or we'd like to think we can extend those type of facilities and more. And as I say, Chair, I can't speak today, so I do apologise. Okay, what I will do is I'm going to hand across to colleagues now to give a presentation. I'm hopeful that the presentation has been sent out in advance, as well as the report. And Nigel, I'll pass across, he'll introduce himself and take you through the report. Thank you, Chair.
Just before we do that, I just thought I ought to say, in terms of declarations of interest, so I'm the alternative director for Kirklees Suez on behalf of the council. So just for information, really.
Yeah, if you could just, brilliant, thank you. I'll collect that afterwards.
Thank you. Would you like to start your presentation then?
Right, thank you, Councillor. I'm Nigel Hancock. I'm the... good grief, that's not off to a great start, is it? I'm the Programme Manager, for the expiry and procurement of the waste disposal contract. So I'll run through the highlights of the report as quickly as I can, because it is quite a detailed report, and I appreciate there's a lot to run through. So I'll run through each section of the actual Cabinet report, starting with the visualisation diagram to show the interdependencies with the collection systems that we've got in the facilities that are included in the actual contract itself. So the report serves several purposes. We wanted to provide information on all the policy changes that are coming our way, and some, as Graham says, have already started to be implemented and the project dependencies as well. So there are other things which are affecting the procurement as well. And I'll give an update on the actual procurement strategy as well, look at the work that we've done since the outline business case was published. I'll run through a very quick summary of the financial implications, including the capital and the revenue, and the legal and risk implications, and finally looking at the recommendations that we're putting forward within the report and the next steps that we'll look at then. So I'll start with the diagram. So this shows all the infrastructure that's required to recycle or process the waste. Open if I click here now. So we've got the waste collection systems that we've got in the vehicles there. We've got the recycling, which is put into the green bin, which runs through the materials recovery facility. And then we've got the grey wagon, which is the residual waste. So that's the black bin waste that goes in the green bin, and that's incinerated through the energy from waste facility, and that generates heat and electricity through that process. So we've got the waste hierarchy kind of in the middle, which puts reuse at the top, which is the reuse that Graham mentioned through the household waste recycling sites. And of course, within the strategy, we do have sitting above that the reduce and repair elements as well. And then at the bottom of the hierarchy, we've got the unavoidable waste to landfill. So that's what we're achieving very high rates of at the moment, of around 85%. So the vehicles that are highlighted, or underlined in red, we've got the glass recycling collections, which is undecided at the moment, but we do currently have a process with the glass bank network spread throughout the district. So that's a future state collection. And we've also got the purple vehicle at the bottom, underlined in red, which is the food waste collections, and those will be introduced in 2028. We will need an anaerobic digester processor facility or something similar to that to process the food waste as well. And then moving on to the red circles, those are all the facilities that we're including in the contract. So there's running of the household waste recycling centres. There's 2 transfer stations, one in North Kirklees, one in South Kirklees, where our collection systems take the waste to for the contractor to then manage. And then we've got the energy from waste facility that I mentioned earlier, on the energy from waste facility and the materials recovery facility. And then, in addition to that, the ones highlighted in the yellow circle, those are other third-party facilities that will be required for processing the waste. Apologies, I did miss out the garden waste collections, the brown vehicle earlier as well, and that goes to a composting facility. The food waste I've mentioned to the anaerobic digester facility, and then the landfill. So those are all third-party facilities that are required as well. So background, I think Graham has already touched on a lot of the PFI contract elements, and you know that we've got an extension in place that expires in 2025, and the interim arrangements are working well against the expected outcomes on this. So all the included assets that were in the red circles on the previous slide and listed here, those will transfer back to the council when the contract expires. But the ageing facilities, obsolescence is increasing, and investment is needed to expand the life expectancy for the new contracts going forward. So the information on the policy changes, we've got a significant number of changes that are coming our way, and these have been delayed for a number of years, which has caused a great deal of uncertainty on what the future requirements will be. So I'm not quite sure of what the service shape will look like going forward. So the key policy changes are listed here, and these are mostly hitting around the same time, and some are already coming into play, and over the next couple of years the others will be brought in as well. So all these changes will have a significant impact on the types of material that are collected, so the recycling materials that will be put into the green recycling bins will change, and this will impact on how they can be processed and recycled going forward. So there's also uncertainty on the new burden funding coming from central government that will be available to local authorities. And the DEFRA funding allocation to implement food waste currently leaves the council with a capital shortfall of around £1.2 million. So many other local authorities are in the same position of struggling to make investment decisions based on the uncertainty. So without clarification, procurements will be delayed. So Project dependencies. In addition to the many policy changes, there are also other dependencies that are outside of control of the procurement project. So to ensure the statutory services can be delivered, the collection fleet needs to be expanded. More depot space is needed to accommodate these additional vehicles, and the existing depots are already struggling for space. The energy from waste facility is also the intended main heat source for the Huddersfield District Energy network as well, which creates another significant key interface with the waste contract. We've also got reforms to the Procurement Act. These have already been delayed, but they're now expected in October 2024. So the timing of the implementation affects whether we run the procurement under the existing regulations or the new Procurement Act 2023. In addition to this, there's also the Network Rail Side Agreement, which commits them to constructing a temporary replacement household waste recycling centre at Weaving Lane in Dewsbury. And of course, the current financial landscape is also making everything more expensive at the same time. Have I just clicked on a slide? Apologies, can I go back? Right, so the procurement strategy, an update on this. So this is to continue the benefits of using the Council's waste facilities for another 10 to 15 year contract. The life expectancy of the facilities is expected to be reached by this point. And we've put a lot of work into evaluating the procurement options, and the recommendation is to keep it all as one integrated contract, looking at splitting it out into different lots and lots of other ways. So this fully integrated contract would include the household waste recycling centres that we'd looked at bringing in-house. And it would also include the bulking and haulage of food waste to a third-party facility, which is included as well, because it wasn't feasible to develop our own facility that we'd looked at putting onto one of two potential sites, but that wasn't possible. So late in 2022, the Infrastructure Projects Authority completed a second review on our preparations for expiry and procurement. And although this did say that an awful lot of progress had been made since the first review, the uncertainty of the future services was still a significant risk, given that we didn't have clarification on this. And they actually recommended that the Council use more of the extension that was available to us to be able to work through all these uncertainties and interdependencies. So, and now a key dependency is for us to actually complete a deed of variation to extend the contract to 2028 before we go through the procurement process later in the year. So the funding implications, we've got £5.9 million of capital funding that was already included in the Council's capital plan, which funded the existing deed of variation. But a further £9.6 million is also required, which was recently approved in the Council's budget. So this will enable the interim arrangements and the gold standard maintenance of the energy from waste facility to continue to 2028. It will also help with replacing obsolescent infrastructure in the facility and give us time to prepare for the new contract. And there is some funding in there as well to meet some of the initial legislative changes that impact on the energy from waste facility. So 3 million of the 9.6 has been allocated to the depot strategy feasibility project as well, so for going forward for the additional vehicle space that's needed. So in addition to that, we've got a total of 41.3 million of pipeline projects. These are currently excluded from the capital plan, and this includes 14.3 million for the turbine replacement and purchasing spare parts at the expiry of the contract. This is for both for the energy from waste facility and the materials recovery facility as well. And 27 million of the 41.3 sorry, is for the development of 2 depots and a replacement of a household waste recycling centre that would need to give way for one of the depots. So all these additional pipeline requirements will be monitored through the and reviewed through the Capital Assurance Board going forward. So revenue implications, there's still an awful lot of uncertainty over the DEFRA revenue funding to support the new statutory services. And the 3-year extension will require further funding to cover the increase in costs and the deed of variation. DEFRA are currently calculating the extended producer responsibility payments. This will provide future funding to the authority for managing packaging waste, but our allocation won't be understood until November this year, and I don't think the payments come in until much later in the next financial year. So the revenue funding for food waste collections is also known, but this won't also be made available to us until the service is implemented in 2028. So any unfunded pressures that we do have will be reviewed and considered through the next budget process. So I think that wraps up the financial summary. So we've also looked at efficiency opportunities as we've gone through the process. So we do have a proposal in the Council Savings Plan for reducing household waste recycling centre services, and that's recently been approved in the Council's budget. Some of the local authorities have already announced reductions in HWRC services, so we're not alone in this thinking. And another saving option that we're exploring is a proposal to mothball the Kirklees material recovery facility and use another third-party facility. So potentially another facility might be more efficient than ours and can cope with the additional recycling materials that will be introduced through the collections consistency changes. So the legal and risk implications. So we will need a legal deed of variation document to extend the contract for the additional 3 years and to ensure that the procurement is compliant with the relevant rules, acts and policies in relation to best value and procurement. We've engaged with our legal services and external legal advisors throughout this project. So the project carries many risks that are regularly reviewed and updated, and although some of the uncertainties won't be fully understood by the time we do get to procurement by the end of this year, by extending the contract, certainty is improved and the risk and costs are lower than not extending. So an additional risk that we've got is the Huddersfield District Energy Network. It has its own benefits, but it does bring additional risk to the waste procurement project. And even though there's long-term uncertainty on the future of energy from waste facilities, it may be that carbon capture facilities will have to be implemented in the future, and new facilities will be more carbon neutral. But in the event of the energy waste facility not being available, the energy network, heat network, can switch to an alternative heat source. So following engagement with the markets, we did a soft market research exercise, and this has changed the energy network, which is now being developed on a heat-only basis without the private wire element. And ongoing engagement with Suez and the HTM team is continuing to ensure that both projects are aligned. So moving on to the recommendations that we're putting forward then. So we assessed a number of options, and these are all detailed within the report. But the recommendations we're making is that the contract is extended for a further 3 years and a second deed of variation is developed. That the procurement strategy for the future operate and maintain services are based on a fully integrated contract, including the household waste recycling centres and food waste sent to a third-party facility. And of course, we'll be submitting a full business case to Cabinet prior to commencement of the new contract. So we're also asking for delegated authority to the strategic directors for growth and generation and service directors for legal and finance to sign off and implement the second deed of variation and draw down the approved funding. And to commence the procurement exercise and draw down the funding that we have set aside for that later in the year. And for officers to take a decision on mothballing Kirklees material recovery facility and the changes to household waste recycling centres to make efficiency savings. And in addition to that, signing off and implementing a deed of variation to cover the Network Rails replacement household waste recycling centre at Weaving Lane. So moving on to the next steps. So following today's meeting, we're going to Cabinet on the 9th of April. I won't run through everything on there, just the key ones is that we'll be commencing the procurement in December this year and looking to commence the new contract in April 2028. And I think that finishes my little presentation, so thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for presenting. I'm going to open it up to the panel first for any questions to officers. Who wants to dive in? Gary, did you want to start with one of your questions then, if that's all right?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that presentation. There's a question there which I thought about, which was that potential curbside collection of Tetra Paks in that period of time, in this next few years. Because it's one of the gaps, isn't it, where this local authority doesn't do that, so potentially there's recyclable product that isn't being recycled as it should. Is there scope in this extension to pick that up and improve it? Thank you.
Tetra Paks are actually included within the collections consistency, so that it will be one of the materials that we will have to collect through the policy changes. We would have to obviously make changes to our materials recovery facility to make sure that these new materials would be recovered. That's one of the reasons why we're exploring the potential in third-party facilities, because they might be better equipped to process these new materials. I think, I mean, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think some of the household waste recycling centres do take Tetra Pak cartons as well, so we do have a small outlet for those currently.
I wondered if Councillor Taylor wanted to come in on that. The other point.
Yeah, I've had a bit of a beef a couple of times about the Tetra Pak collection, because I take mine to the household waste recycling centres, and the last two occasions I've had cause to take stuff there, and I've taken them to the one up in Denby Dale and also the one down in Huddersfield. Both sites, the container was over full, and I was told to shove stuff elsewhere. Now, I've reported it, you've responded, which is great, but there is a flaw that it doesn't seem like the ops managers in the actual recycling centres themselves are ensuring that if the container is getting full, They're actually damn well doing something about it. So the one, when I went to Emerald Street, the guy there told me it'd been full for about a month and nothing had been done. So I just think there needs to be some discussion with Suez, probably, because it's not our guys on those sites, is it? To just, you know, let's just say that, you know, one of the councils got grumpy about it. Because I do. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, that's some of the discussions we've been having with Suez about more of a consistent service. So obviously, as Nigel said, in part of simpler recycling, there's Tetra Pak, there's glass, there's plastic film as well, which all need markets to develop over the next few years. And some of the conversations we're having with Suez is we have very limited infrastructure that's 27 years old now. It was brilliant in the day, it was visionary in some of the things that were in the contract, but we're 27 years on in a different market with a different ask. And so we're saying, actually, we're having conversations, can we do something to our existing MRF to make it more efficient and effective? That's very limited given the space that's available and the technology. So is there something else in one of your more modern MRFs, you know, that's reasonably close, that we can actually take that capacity and start to bring some of this stuff online and on stream earlier to sort of tackle some of the issues that Councillor Taylor's raised there. But we'll specifically take back the overflowing one and the comments from Emerald Street.
Do you want to carry on, John?
I mean, that answers that question. I'm going to ask another one if you want. So I'm interested to know, we talk about one of the saving proposals is to a reduction to the household waste recycling centres, get my letters right. I wonder if you could just explain a little more to us what that actually means.
I can pick that one up. So as part of these discussions, obviously everyone, I won't replay the financial environment or sort of the way the council finds itself, but we were challenged as a service to look at how can we be more effective and more efficient. As part of that, we've had those discussions with Suez over, they operate our sites, they understand when the peak periods are, they understand when the down periods are, they understand where the waste flows are, which ones are heavily used, which ones are not heavily used. And so could they come forward with an offer that makes it the most efficient whilst trying to protect and maintain as much of the service as possible, as broad geographically as possible. And so some of those proposals were included within the recent budget that went through. That will include a closure of a household waste site and will include looking at the opening hours and reducing some of them when it's the most quiet period on 2 other sites as well. But as we bring forward those discussions, we've got to negotiate with Suez. There's a deed of variation element, and also there's the natural governance process internally that we'd need to go through. But that's a broad summary of what we're looking at.
Would you like to come back on that?
No, I don't think so. I'll just ponder on that one for a little bit.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would like to just talk about I really don't envy you having to work in the regulatory and legal environment that's laid out to us in this report, because it sounds extremely complicated and remarkably uncertain in an awful lot of ways. So I'm just trying to seek some points of clarity, really. So on the deposit return scheme, which it says in here is designed to remove sort of plastics, bottles, aluminium and steel cans from recycling bins, where will they then go? How else will they be recycled? Because that, on the face of it, that doesn't sound like it's reducing waste, just moving waste. And that has implications for the financial viability of our recycling processes. So I'd like a bit of clarity on that, please. The next one was on the extended producer responsibility, the EPR. Hang on, let me just clarify this. Guarantee that the council was... So the costings that are associated with this, presumably the idea of the scheme is to put the financial burden of dealing with waste on the manufacturers who produce the waste, produce the things that go on to be waste in the first place. But there's no guarantee that the money we will end up receiving will actually cover the costs of disposing of this waste. And I just wanted to clarify, is that just the revenue costs of disposing that waste, or does it also include the actual capital costs of creating the facilities that will go on to help us dispose of this waste? And finally, on the separate food waste collection, particularly the non-compliance, the element of what happens if you don't comply. It says that the level of financial exposure for non-compliance within statute is unknown, but DEFRA have indicated that the new burden funding associated with the introduction of food waste would not be available where the local authority is not complying. So am I right in thinking that that means that they might not give us enough money to do it, and then they might not give us the little money that they were going to give us for not doing it? Is that what that means? Thank you, Chair.
Nigel did all the hard work, I'll do the questions. Deposit return scheme, it's a little bit like locally, there used to be Benshaws, you know, where you used to get your bottle, take it back and get some money. It's that sort of system they're looking to build at your supermarkets, at other take-back schemes, where you get some form of credit back for taking these material streams. What that means for us is what goes into people's green bins will change. And we don't know what it will change to, but it's probably going to be the less valuable, more difficult types of waste to deal with, which is why we're not considering at this point investing in a materials recycling facility, because we could easily put £6 to £10 million in something that's useless in a few years' time. So can we mothball what we have, but then look at other facilities to use that economies of scale, companies that are better placed to change the technology and adapt it, whilst we talk about the procurement and secure something longer term that's fit for purpose. Hopefully we'll see that settle and we'll understand the waste streams, you know, as we get towards that 2028. In terms of EPR, the theory is that the producer pays. So this is supposed to be, as we're picking up your bottles from the side of the road, that the person who produced that bottle and made profit from that bottle should be paying for that bottle to be picked up and paying for it to be recycled. The calculations, the way they're going to do it is unknown at the moment. They're talking about third-party regulatory bodies being set up, but then they're talking about modelling what a local authority's an efficient service should look like. Therefore, there's limitations coming in already, isn't there? So we don't know at this point what will come through. What we also don't know is how much that the deposit return scheme may then influence that, because they do interconnect. And what the government have said is that one will only follow the other. So extended producer responsibility will land first, and then deposit return scheme will come after, because there's some debate over glass. Is glass in or out? In Scotland and Wales it was in England it was out, it was all paused, and so we don't know if there will be any funding through any of those systems for the glass collection system, which is why we're looking at what's the alternative interim model until we get to some more certainty in terms of funding there, because, you know, we have modelled what it would take to put a full curbside glass on, compliant with simpler recycling. That's standing in the region of £5 million revenue a year and £10 million capital. We've modelled what extra benefit we get in terms of glass coming in, and that's about 1,000 tonnes. So is the value of £5 million and £10 million worth that 1,000 tonnes versus what the model we have today? And so environmentally, financially, that's not stacking up unless there's some other funding comes in or something else changes. And in terms of food waste, the discussions we're having with DEFRA is, and it's an interesting one because we worked with DEFRA, we worked with RAP to model some of our base data early on in the waste strategy in terms of what fleet size it would be, what efficiency it would be, how many people we'd need. They've modelled it separately again more recently and come up with a very different figure and a lesser figure than we want, which is the 1.2 million just in capital shortfall that we talked about. The revenue figure we haven't seen anything of yet, and we haven't heard the basis, but if it's on the same assumption, it's going to be short to what we need to a full service rollout. So the conversations we have with DEFRA have been around, well, does this mean we don't roll it out if we don't get the funding, or do we roll it out until the funding's spent? And then say that's us complying because we've pushed it as much as you funded it. And therefore, you know, we may roll out a partial service across the district that spends the money that we have. But there's still no clarity at the moment. And we're still in conversations with DEFRA. We're sending through our information. A number of other authorities are doing the same. There is promise of looking at adjustments and promise of looking at, you know, perhaps changing what the funding is, but then the future funding is reliant on the next set of government spending. And as we know, there's probably an election in between here and there, isn't there? And we may review some of these policies, and so there's real question mark over the revenue. And the capital's not due to get to us till 2026. And again, some of our concern is by the time we get there, as the people who've argued early doors for more money, taken all of our money, and so by the time we get there, there's nothing left in the pot for Kirklees. And so these are all things that are in the mix at the moment, which is why we think it makes sense to locking the benefit we've got to the contract today for as long as possible till we get past a certainty horizon of 2028 when all this legislation has to come into place, to then be able, as we go through the procurement strategy, have those conversations with contractors in a dialogue process to adapt and focus and reach and change what we're asking for as we go, and try and get the most efficient and best value contract we can.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that answer. Very comprehensive and explains quite a lot, and leads me on to the next couple of things I wanted to ask. One was about the glass collection. So you've explained that basically it sounds like, even though it was in our strategy to have curbside glass collections, there's just too much uncertainty at the moment to try and roll that forward. And so basically, because I noted on page 29 of our packs, when it's the timetable of next steps, glass isn't mentioned at all. And so I assume that that's the reason. We just basically do not know what it is we actually want because we don't know what we can afford. Okay, thank you for that. And the implications for the changes in I think the report calls it the calorific value of our waste for the energy from waste facility. It mentions in the report that a potential solution might be, or a mitigating factor might be, the use of third-party waste. So I just wondered if you could maybe exposit a bit on what that might actually mean and what kind of third parties we're talking about and how kind of viable that is as a potential solution before the end of the life of the EFW.
Yeah, on the glass collection, we're looking at what we can do now. So can we have a more extensive bring bank service? Can we have something that's within a reasonable walking distance of every resident, but it's not at your doorstep? So we're looking at and talking to suppliers at the moment, see just how far we can perhaps push that model as an interim till we get more certainty. So we're not standing still. We did run a trial on glass collection as well within the district. It produced very little for the investment that came through. You know, it was a few single figure tonnes a week from quite a few thousand properties. So we're not talking big volumes. It sort of confirmed what we thought in terms of our waste modelling. And like I said, it went into that environmental benefit of all these extra vehicles with the extra fuel, with the extra people, with the extra weight going through all the districts, through every street versus the benefit of that 1,000 tonnes. And at the moment, that's not stacking up for us, but we're trying alternative models and we will be looking at actively over the next sort of few months for that. In terms of the calorific value, some of the things that Nigel mentioned in terms of the capital investment is looking at can we make the FW future-proof as much as we can see leading into the next contract, which means some adaptation to the technology on, which is some better firing technology. That means that if it is a lower calorific value, that they can fire it and make sure they can get the right temperatures. We're putting some monitoring on there for looking for the emissions trading. So there's some things we're looking at now to see what can we do. In terms of third party, that's probably around a bit of blending and a bit of volume. So if we bring on food waste, we bring on glass waste, we bring everything, we're naturally going to bring down the overall volume of waste that we put into that facility. We do fill some of it with our own trade waste business, but actually is there something where we can perhaps sell capacity? You know, I'll have inter-authority agreements or something that brings other people's waste into our facility under the new contract, where we get a benefit for that. We've got a more effective and efficient facility because it's running at the right capacity rather than something that we might have to stop and start firing or run ineffectively, really, because we haven't got enough waste to keep it burning, if that makes more sense.
I'm just going to very briefly ask a question to do with glass collections, then I'm going to come to Councillor Taylor. So obviously where you spoke about exploring the alternative, I understand why the curbside collection is not appealing, but when you're talking about continuing to use those glass banks, are we looking at an inclusive approach to that? Because obviously there are people with mobility problems, access issues and things. How are we considering their needs when you're working out how best to roll that out?
Short answer is yes, which is why you're not seeing any quick movement. It's a specific waste project stream that we've set up now that's not one of Nigel's, but it's one of the other teams who's talking to some other authorities. We're learning from what they've done. Some have got quite extensive bring banks, much more on higher density than us. You know, what are they doing? How are they doing it? And what I should have also mentioned is, as part of the Suez conversations, we are also looking at some point in these other facilities, could glass go into that bin as well? So it is a consideration, there's no certainty around it, but the strategy is what can we expand now, what can we expand in the interim, and then we can resolve it longer term under the new contract, because we'll have the right facilities, the right depots, the right infrastructure to back it off then. So we're looking at that sort of three-phase approach.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, a couple of follow-ons from what we've just been talking about, to be honest. We've talked a little bit about the exploring the possibility of mothballing the MRF, and I'm just trying to get my head around what that would actually mean in practice. What we're really saying is potentially what might happen is the lorries would still take the waste to the MRF site, and then someone else would then move it from there to somewhere else. We're not saying we're going to send the lorries to Leeds or something like that, are we? Okay, that's a relatively straightforward one. And then just again on the glass collection, from memory, and it's getting a bit dodgy these days, but from memory, I think what the pilot that we did all in similar types of locations. So they were all sort of blocks of flats and multi-occupancy places. I'm just wondering whether there's any opportunity to explore other types of situations, because I know some of my villages where they struggle to recycle because there isn't any recycling facility in that village, and they can't exactly lug all their lager bottles on the, well, I suppose they could in theory on the bus or something, but so is it looking at where there is gaps at the moment? And I'm sure different communities will get through different types of glass or volumes of glass also. So we're looking at that as part of this new work stream that we've got, really.
Yeah, I think going back to the MRF and the potential there as well, Councillor Taylor, there's an opportunity for co-mingle at some point. Uncertainty around that yet because of the challenges that Will and Nigel have been communicating. But that might be an option for us regarding glass. But I wanted just to remind the panel as well that we do recycle quite a significant amount of glass within the borough. We're not recycling, 4,000 tonnes is the figure, I think. And we're not far behind local authorities that do undertake curbside collection on that figure. So we need to be very sensible as to where we go. You're right, Councillor Taylor, we did look at the houses of multi-occupancy. Well, why wouldn't you? Sensible. But it was a significant cost for a very, very small return. And I wouldn't want to step into that space again until we understand in more detail where ultimately the new regulations will take us. There's some big numbers around this financially, aren't there? And our job is to make sure that this council is protected from investing in things that are subsequently not going to be required of us. And I think when you're chatting earlier on around the producer responsibilities, and Will said, yeah, what will be left for ourselves, and that is quite a challenge to us. We'll be maybe picking up the nastiest things to recycle, which might cause us more of a challenge than the glass and the other elements. So it's a very uncertain panel, and I'm sorry we can't be more clear on some of these questions, but we are trying as best. Okay.
I've got other questions, Chair. Do you want me to? Yeah, okay. Three other things to just touch on, if you may. One thing that we haven't talked about today, and it wasn't on the little diagram, and I'll probably get the title wrong, but I think it's PEPs, which are the sofas. PEPs. And again, that's another one where there's some new regulations come in without any money associated with them. I just wondered where that fits into the overall strategy, because presumably we do have to bring that in, and it almost becomes another stream in that, where we were showing all of the different categories, doesn't it? Because it has to be dealt with differently. So we just touch on that one. The second one was the reuse shops. So currently, if you want to donate, there's only 2 locations where you can take it to donate. And I'm just wondering if there is discussions around extending that, because I know that, again, it's a bit like the glass. If you haven't got private transport, it's very, very difficult for you to donate stuff. So, you know, if we are bringing in, you know, other areas where you can donate that stuff, that would be interesting. And then finally, and I do kind of hesitate asking this question, but we are still getting grief about the day-to-day bin service. I just wonder.
We had a discussion before the meeting started, but I think if possible, I'll come back to that when we talk about the work programme, if that's okay.
Well, I'm just going to ask for a comment today. To be honest, we've got the right people in front of us, and on a daily basis I'm getting complaints, so you know it does feel like the right thing to ask for me.
So POPs. It's one of those words that brings pitchforks and fire out in the waste industry at the moment. So for people who aren't aware of it, it was a regulation that sat there dormant for a very long time, and the Environment Agency decided to start enforcing it with 3 months' notice. And this was a system shock to the entire industry because there wasn't the outlets at all. What it means is you have to take certain material that's been fire retardant coated, you have to shred it, and then you have to burn it in an EFW at a certain temperature. So that introduced last year costs of around about £850,000 in disposal that were completely unbudgeted that came into the system. So the first things we've been doing and it's at the top of that hierarchy, is reuse. So it's looking at how can we reuse this, how can we set up networks of people, you know, donating it to other places, giving it away, putting it on social media to say, does anyone want this sofa? Come and collect it for free. Some of that you may have seen on our sort of charging structure. We've reflected the cost of charges now by item in our bulky waste service to reflect what it's costing us on the back end. But actually this week we've just got the tenders back for reuse partner procurement that we've undertaken. So we've been operating under a trial basis for a couple of years. That was to build up sort of the data, the information. We've now sort of mid-procurement of a longer-term partnership, which will see us secure those shop outlets, look to expand into curbside collection as well. That's in there in the discussions to potentially get it out of the system much earlier as well, and to look at how we may expand on the sort of household waste sites and see how we can open up sort of the levels of deposits stations that are out there as well. So it's very much on our agenda as something that can help us manage POPs whilst being at the top of the agenda on waste hierarchy, and better for the environment overall, especially in sort of some of the financial climates we see today. And there's perfectly good reusable items that are sort of going in the back of a bin wagon at the moment that we want to pull out. So hopefully that's a good answer. Graham, you wanted to come in on the...
Okay, thanks. Yeah, from a collection point of view, I think what I would say to the panel and those people that are obviously watching the live stream is we have had a number of challenging situations to deal with. The review of the rounds was one element of it, and a little bit more. And I think we have to be very open and honest and apologise for anyone that's had a challenging time around at their bin collections. It's something that the team continue to work on now, and we can see that the collections are returning to the normal position. But as I was speaking to Chair previously, we would like to come back and give a more detailed appraisal of where we are with our bin collections. We're already putting systems in place and changing the way that we work. We have 2 operational depots, as you know, at Councillor Taylor, one at Vine Street and one at George Street. The one at George Street now is working on an area-based approach, which is seeing an improved collection performance. And the next step now is to roll that out across the borough in order that we can try and improve and maintain what is a good performance up until now. 99.75 is our target, and we did drop down to about 99.5. As I say, apologise for anyone that's had a particular difficult time on bin collection more recently, but the team are working hard to resolve that situation. But of course, I'd like to come back, Chair, when you arrange your next year's programme to have a more detailed discussion around that. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, are you happy to leave it at that for now, or would you like to come back in?
I think the issue for me has never been a missed bin. The issue is and still remains specific locations where they're missed on a regular basis, and some of them are even at stage 2 complaints, and the bins are still being missed. And I don't understand, and I still, even today, do not understand why it is so difficult for us as a service with those individual locations that are a problem to resolve them. And it's a communication and management issue, and that's what I don't expect you to have the answer to that today. That's why I want exploring is why is it that I'm getting the same resident ringing me week after week after week after week? Because yes, there's always problems, but once one's been flagged as a problem location, I don't understand why the service can't resolve that, and they seem to struggle to do that on a regular basis.
Could I'll just chip in, because I know you had offered another drop-in session for councillors to speak to officers. I don't know if that is something that could be addressed at that, or if it's something that you think we'll have to wait for it to come back to scrutiny. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to work with ward members. There are 1 or 2 of you that are having a particular difficult time. We did a workshop some time ago, and we've already said that we will do another workshop to deal with councillors and speak to councillors to inform and advise.
Thank you, that's fine. So if we could prioritise getting that booked in, and maybe we can look at some of those sort of specific issues that we're facing. Thank you. Gary, I know in the pre-discussion that you had another question that you wanted to come back to on the longevity of the energy from waste plan. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, from reading through the documentation, it's clear that the producing energy from waste could be a constantly declining issue, because the more as an area as a country we go through the waste hierarchy and hopefully improve it, there'll be less burnable waste, if you like. So what's the long-term plan? Because I know it was mentioned that you could bring in waste from elsewhere, but won't the local authorities elsewhere be having exactly the same issue of having waste for energy plants which basically can't operate successfully because they haven't got enough? They'll all be scrabbling around for a small and small amount of suitable waste matter. And how do you see beyond that timeline when hopefully there won't be enough waste where the only thing we can do is burn it? Have you got a sort of a timeline or a way you could sort of wind down to that period of time? Thank you.
Yeah, I can take that one. So at the moment, the strategy is to work to the life of the existing EFW, which is about 40 to 45 years, which brings us up to why we're putting a 10 to 15 year procurement in sort of next time. That will give us, once we've sort of procured that, we'll start to move into the what after. And there is no answers at the moment. There's wishes. People want to move beyond EFWs, they want to move into reuse, they want to minimise waste, but that doesn't exist at the moment. Now, emissions trading scheme is something that was briefly mentioned, which is starting to charge for the amount of plastic that's going in, a carbon tax type approach. That will start to drive some behaviour. It'll drive behaviour within the commercial world as well as in the sort of domestic world. And it will see some technology start to shift towards carbon capture. So, as Nigel said, making them a little bit more zero impact. As we stand here today, there is no energy from waste facility with any carbon capture on it. So it's something that's going to take quite a significant period of time to establish, to invest. And there's a question over our facility and the suitability of such a small facility relatively to invest carbon capture in it. And so we are anticipating that we probably will need to look at something different in the future, maybe on a regional type model, maybe sharing with neighbours, and we've started some of those conversations already, of how we can all work together for one solution. We're not quite there yet. It'll probably take the next generation of procurement, and then I think we'll probably be in a position to look at what the future is. In terms of waste supply, there's more than enough to go at in the business world, because a lot of the statutory changes in legislation has been really focused on domestic, on household waste. This is the first time in the change of legislation it's going to broaden to treat businesses and commercial entities equally with local authorities, essentially. And so the same onus on collecting food waste, collecting recycled materials is going to be placed on businesses, But like I said, there's a huge amount of landfill still goes on within those sectors. And so I think supply of waste across the next disposal contract that we're pretty comfortable with. It's what happens after that. We're going to need to take that time to decide.
Could I just come in on that point about trade waste, whether, I presume we are, but what considerations are being given to how we can help businesses to, you know, I've certainly have had businesses come to me saying we would love to recycle, but we can't register, there isn't an option, or it's not cost appropriate. I just wondered, whether we've got that factored in. If the onus is going to be on them, they're going to be looking for ways to fulfil their, to comply, and are we able to facilitate that?
So some of you may know we launched a recycling service on our trade waste quite successfully. You know, that was offered to all schools and it was offered to all businesses within sort of our contractors essentially. That's running really well. It was done with this in mind, with actually we need to get something started to understand what that market is, to then grow it and develop it. You know, one of the limiting factors we're looking at the moment is around the depot space. As was mentioned, there's only so much physical space for vehicles and you need more vehicles if you've got a bigger service. And also our existing material recycling facility has a limited capacity as well. So if we grew our trade waste business too much, it would displace the capacity that's being used for our domestic bins, which is again leading back to why we're having some of those conversations with the existing contractor about what other materials recycling facilities are within the region, what capacity do they have, what could we secure, what type of materials can they take to try and remove some of these barriers over the next few years to be able to start to grow that service.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just building again on Gary's question about the EFW and its implications for the district energy network, although I suppose now that we're not going to do electricity, it might go back to being called the district heat network again. But it says in the report that the system was designed from the start to have a potential alternative sources of heat built in as a contingency. And if kind of the feeling is right that energy from waste is going to become a thing of the past as the waste and the hierarchy of waste changes, I'm just wondering what thought is being put in at the moment, you know, decades ahead of when it's going to need to come to fruition for that contingency and for a replacement of the heat source. Because if I remember correctly, John and I were talking about this before, when the energy network came to scrutiny last year or the year before, the backup system within the network was some gas, just in case the energy from waste plant wasn't available or the turbine needed replacing or something. That's the backup within the system, which is fine. But we don't want fossil fuels to be the eventual replacement for the entire network. So I'm just wondering what kind of the current thinking is on where the technology might be in 10, 15 years' time.
Yeah, okay, thanks for another good and interesting question there. At the moment, from an energy from waste point of view and the HDEN, the relationship, there's a full business case that's being developed. Now, we're hoping that will come back in about December of this year, which will tease out some of the points that you're making. But we'll just let that take its course and wait with interest as to what that particular business case gives us. Okay.
Something for next year's schedule, perhaps. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm just going to let Councillor Bamford speak, as he's not had a turn yet.
Right. Turbine replacement. Is it scheduled? It's getting on a bit now. If we don't replace it within this contract, what will the effect be on the next contract? Is it the turbine and the alternator, everything? Is it the whole thing? And is it going to be replaced with a more efficient one, so we get more, it produces more electricity, so therefore we get better value for money from it? I'll leave it at that for now, if that's all right.
So, in sort of next deed of variation, we're looking to secure to 2028. The main element is the gearbox that we're concerned about in terms of the spinny bit, as I explained to people, was taken down, it was refurbished, it was put back in, but the gearbox is the bit that's showing a little bit of wear and tear. And so as part of some of the capital infrastructure, we'll be looking to procure a machined gear ready on site and as part of the spares so that the downtime is minimised and they can just flip it in and turn it on. In terms of the next procurement, we debated, is it better to put it in now or to wait until there's a new incoming contractor who can then put their own specification in, can design it how they want to operate it as well, can look at what the material is at that point that's coming through, does it need to change specification? And sort of as we went through various pluses and minuses, we landed on allowing the new contractor to come in, for them to specify what they would want, because then that meant that the risk and the reward was also with them. If we put it in now and we got the specification wrong, there's potential that, you know, this could sit with us for a number of years. Under procurement, if we transfer some of that risk to the incoming contractor, then obviously that's sat with us and not us as an authority, because we're not engineering experts, are we? We have advisors that come and tell us, but we wanted that investment to come in that year. It's also easier to cash flow that level of investment in a new contract. You know, if it came in now, we'd have to put all that capital procurement in, there'd be the downtime, there'd be additional revenue for alternative facilities as well while it's offline for probably the best part of 12 months. You know, to bring it down, take it out, put the new one back in. And what we also wanted was a bit more certainty around the HDEN and the requirements of the HDEN, so we can feed that into whatever we procure and whatever's specified in terms of a new turbine. So that's why we landed on new contract within that procurement. It's part of the competitive dialogue process. We'll tease out of them what they want to do and why they want to do it. We'll check that that's the right specification for us from our sort of technical experts. And then we can look at how we invest and how we might profile that investment, which is not insignificant, is it?
All right, thank you for that. Yeah, but if we don't know exactly what we're going to have in there, you know, how do we come to a cost? We've got a cost against it now, haven't we? How do we know? Is that just a ballpark figure? It may be that, it may go up in the next few years. And what is the cost implication on? Do we know where the waste goes when we close down? Does it go to another EFW or does it go to landfill? You know, what is the cost and what's the effect on our recycling figures then if it goes straight to landfill?
So it's based on some turbines that are being replaced fairly recently in some similar facilities. So like I said, we've got technical advisors on board that are doing this day in, day out every week. So it's based on ballpark of that. But like you said, it's a pipeline pressure we've put in, because as we go, things may inflate, it may change through the dialogue process. We've got to keep talking and going, it's gone up to 20 or it's gone down to 10, you know, and allow the council finances to adapt as we go down. In terms of the impact, that's why I think it was more important to put it in the new contract, because we don't really want to landfill, which would have been the cheapest option. So we probably want to secure some alternative EFW capacity. That will take some planning in a new contractor coming in to be able to secure in other facilities. It will also mean we can probably cash flow that impact. So rather than £8 to £10 million landing in 1 year of alternative facility costs, we can perhaps get that and then profile it across 10 years of a contract and sort of smooth through the revenue impact of that change. That makes sense.
I can see you've thought about it well, thank you.
I'm going to go to Councillor Taylor because you had one. Wait.
Yeah, it's just a reflection really. So whilst we're progressing all of this, we're also in parallel progressing our sustainability strategy. And are we making sure that we're understanding, it's not so much dependencies, it's just if they deliver, it will have an impact on what you have to work with, won't it? So I'm guessing there needs to be very close dialogue and alignment between those two, is that right?
I was just going to agree, really. Yeah, we're working with the Cat Armitage team on a regular basis, not only in this area but in other areas of the service as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just going back to the energy from waste site and the entire sort of structure of the contract, really. A lesson that was learnt about PFI when they all first happened. But for context, when this contract was signed, I was 1 year old. So it's a long time ago. But a lesson that was learnt was that you don't want to set up a contract where the public sector carries all the cost and the capital implications, and the private sector involvement gets all the benefit and the revenue. And there is reference in the report about sharing costs as well as sharing profits. And so I was just hoping you could elaborate a bit on what your current thinking is and how that's going to work, because obviously it makes sense for, if anybody's going to borrow a lot of money for capital, it makes sense for it to be the local authority, because we're in a much more advantageous position to do so than a private company is, by far. But we don't want to then, we want to then get some of the return on our investment as the public sector and as the taxpayers of Kirklees. So I was just wondering if you could talk us through what your current thinking is on that in the negotiations.
Yeah, we've had quite a number of conversations with councils. We've recently gone through what we call emergency procurements, the pure O&M, they've taken all the risk, but they've taken all the reward. We've had conversations with authorities that have had more of a balance. I think we're probably looking at more of a balance. So when we flip into the new contract, the assets paid for, it's just your ongoing operational maintenance and some of the key elements that just need replacing, like the turbine. So there's less capital to invest there. So there's less reason to give all the benefit to the private sector for them to cash flow that capital. So then it's about what's the energy benefit. And we will be looking at a new contract to get some of that energy benefit, especially as it only seems to be going up, doesn't it, over time? But it needs to be a balance where there's something in the contract with the contractor that cares about how much energy is being produced. What we don't want to do is simply have a pure operation and maintenance contract that means that as long as they're replacing the right number of widgets every day, how much energy is produced they don't really care about, and that purely puts all the energy risk and market with the local authority. We want something that blends that and says, well, we want to take probably the majority share of it, but we want to share some of that with you so that you want to perform better and you want to make more energy output because you're making more profit from that as well. And we haven't got the answer to that balance yet, but that's sort of where we're looking to balance it. But like I said, take more of that benefit back. Now the PFI phase is over and the assets are transferring back to us.
I just had a quick question about the emissions trading scheme. It does mention that from 2026 operators have to implement monitoring, and I just wondered how much of our current monitoring will be fit for purpose and what additional cost is likely to be involved in the monitoring that's required.
So it's completely new equipment we're having to install, and it's in part of that capital that we're going to allocate early and invest in part of the DOV2, as we're calling it. The monitoring will be from 2026 and it will be implemented from 2027. On current estimates, this could have an impact between £2 and £5 million of revenue, depending where it lands. So that's why we've got a lot of work going on at the moment, and I'm looking to Nigel to my left here, speaking with DEFRA, about what's the alternative, what can we do, how can we divert some of that plastics, how can we look at what we do to our frontline services, to our household waste site services as well, to get the plastic out, differential charging, how we operate with businesses. So all that's working through our minds at the moment, because we cannot fit a carbon capture technology onto that EFW, nor is there anything in the market that has that either. So it's not like we could close our EFW down and go to market and it'll all be fine. It just doesn't exist at the moment. So it's how do we minimise that revenue that's playing through our minds at the moment.
Thank you. Any other questions from the panel? Gary?
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's not entirely a question, but just your thoughts on this. It's been an interesting afternoon, but it seems very clear to me that there's an awful lot being expected of local authorities to do, and that involves pretty much a large amount of cost and a lot of difficulty. But it seems to me, on the other side of the argument, I don't see, I guess it's probably slightly out of scope here, but I don't see much on the other side, as in, if people, businesses behave badly in the environmental terms, what is the penalty that would apply? Because surely that could offset the revenue potential from that, could help with the costing of running the schemes as you intend to do. It's just a thought that, yeah, it seems slightly lopsided from where I'm sitting at the moment.
Yeah, I think wise words there and a fair comment. I did briefly mention around culture and behaviour earlier, and if anything, my next comment is a call to arms. The council can do what it can do. within the regulations and the guidance. The investment is significant. We don't want to get that wrong. We want to extend our current arrangements with our current providers to give us that breathing space. But absolutely, we want residents within the borough to consider recycling, consider what they're producing, how they're disposing of that, and it's a partnership.
Thank you all. Are we happy to say thank you very much to the officers for that discussion? I think hopefully it was helpful for you. It was certainly very interesting for us. Thank you for your time today. Okay, thank you everyone. So we've got the last item on the agenda is the work programme, which obviously is mostly reflective, looking at what we have looked at through the year. I'm hoping it's okay. I did wonder if we wanted just a brief discussion about, we'll have the workshop, hopefully June time in the new municipal year, whether we wanted a discussion now about any priorities we wanted to highlight and make sure we're kind of pushed forward at that workshop. We've obviously mentioned a couple. Thank you all. We've obviously mentioned a couple today. So the waste collection, absolutely, early on. And the HDN was suggested that we would want to look at that at some point during the year. But I just thought it would be helpful to know from panel members, things that you would like to see up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely, the ones you've already said. Two that I'd like to highlight is the future of bereavement services. I think that's been sort of on the list for a couple of years now, and we're yet to actually get them in front of us. And there are a few things going on, things about the creme and burial spaces that it's well worth scrutiny having a look at. So I'd like to highlight that one. And events. We said at the start of this year that when this committee was created that it falls under us as scrutiny, and as of yet we haven't had events come before us. And it's a good time to review the year of music for 2023 that happened and to celebrate the successes of Woven and Pride. I think it's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just speak to the events. So I was also conscious that it had once again dropped off our timetable. I did have a conversation with officers a couple of days ago. They had said that they didn't have clarity as to what we were wanting to scrutinise. So it had been put on their list by the previous director, Colin Parr. They weren't clear what they were supposed to be bringing, which obviously would have been helpful if they'd mentioned that a bit earlier. But what we've agreed is they certainly, we discussed the importance of looking back at those big events to sort of scrutinise whether, what value they brought. So certainly they were sort of very visible, but can we actually have a look at what benefit they brought to the area? Partly with a view to, if we're planning taking part in something in the future, we want to know whether it's worthwhile. And also because there are some, they said they're in conversations already sort of across West Yorkshire about potentially some linked up events. And again, we want to know what those conversations are before anything's agreed. So they'd agreed to bring a report for round about September, October time. They felt that would be, they could put a report together that would be useful and that was still in time to have some pre-decision scrutiny on some of those sort of wider conversations, if the panel are happy with that. Sorry.
You want me on this? A couple of things to throw into that. One, I'm not sure which year, but the year of culture for Bradford's not too far off.
Yeah, it's 2025.
And there's bound to be some spin-offs or involvement from us with that. And if there isn't, there ought to be. So we ought to...
With music was the start of a three-year plan, actually, that culminates in that year of culture. So yeah, absolutely.
I'd also be interested in looking at not just those really big events, but the way in which the council, we have the blueprints for the towns. Part of that is about revitalising our town centres. Events have a role to play within that. The Food and Drink Festival that fell apart in Huddersfield, it'd be nice to have a drains up on what went wrong and what we can do to resurrect those type of, it's not really the council's event, but the council is supportive and facilitative. And, how are we doing that and are we getting that right? And are there some learnings we could get from that type of thing? And then also the other one, I don't know whether it falls within this panel or not, which is our museum offer, because I think it links quite nicely. You know, and again, understanding what that is, where we are, you know, how are we using the like of Oakwell through the year, you know, even down to my village in Cliff House and what we do with Cliff House. It's those sort of assets that we have. How are we using them as part of that broader sort of cultural visitor economy, promoting whatever, yeah, that bump, kind of.
I think there's a sort of a strategy around heritage, etc. So your events and your heritage strategy, etc. I think would fit together well. So you know, yes, yeah.
Can I ask, would that therefore need to come to Greater Regen as well? Is that a conversation, so we can just have it together? Has anyone, I mean, obviously, you know, this isn't, we're going to have the workshop to sort this out, but has anyone else got anything that they'd really like to flag up at this point? Yes. Sorry, I'm just going to Gary, if that's all right.
Thank you. Yeah, the one on the list which I think is quite interesting is the parks and green space vision. Because we do have some amazing places, but what do we want them to be? Do we want the parks and spaces to be, should we say, places that are always exceptionally easy to access in the kind of area one could go around, or do we want to let some places be a bit more wild and introduce more wildlife and that kind of thing, if you know what I mean? So do we just want nice, pretty flower beds and lawns so we can go around those, or do we want to do something a bit more wild and promote something to encourage wildlife and biodiversity perhaps in some areas? Just initial thoughts.
So it might be that we can look at bringing items sort of to the same meeting that maybe potentially Parks and Green Space could cross over with something about the, you know, biodiversity, or, yeah, we can have a look at that. Thank you.
I was going to say, I suspect we will have to do some pre-scrutiny on car parking strategy. Whatever ends up once consultation's been done, I suspect that will be one that the public will be fairly interested in as well. So we probably ought to have that on the list, shouldn't we?
Absolutely. So is that something that we can look at the flight path for and make sure that if it needs to be, you know, that first meeting or what have you, then it's on there, it doesn't get missed just because of us not having that vision of where it's coming? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Anything else from anybody? Okay, I'll leave it at that then. Thank you very much, all of you. That is the end of our formal meeting. Thank you.